Welcome to video 2 on improvising harmony in a classical style. This week we're going to be developing what we did last time. So last time we were going to C consistently at the end of our phrases. And this week we're going to be going to different chords. This is going to create a sense of changing key. And this is the way that most classical pieces and improvisations create a sense of developing plot or rising action, increasing drama, new characters, all that stuff. That's created by changing keys. Before I get into that, I do want to talk a little bit about the terminology that I'm using to describe these harmonies, because I'm not giving chord names with major and minor and inversions. I'm actually using figured bass. So if you look up figured bass on your own, you'll probably find some charts with a lot of different notation on them. You might find some information talking about inversions, and it can seem very overwhelming and intimidating at first. But the thing to know is that at its heart, at its core, figured bass is actually one of the simplest ways of indicating harmony, because it really does just tell you two things. One, the bass note, which is going to be the lowest note that you play, and then one or more numbers. That's the figure, and that tells you the notes to play with the bass note. Let me show you an example. So we have C in the bass, and then say we have a figure that has a 6 and a 3. That means play a sixth, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and a third, 1, 2, 3, and we have a 6-3 chord, or a 6-3 figure. Now, a lot of times figured bass is abbreviated. Some of the numbers are left out because they're so conventional that we can kind of do without repeating them all the time. And one of those numbers is the 3. 3 sounds so good with so many different bass notes and in so many different situations that it's usually just assumed. So actually, you'll often see a figure that just says 6, and that actually means play 6 and 3. This chord I'm calling the 5 chord, but often in figured bass this gets no figure at all. Sometimes it's called the common chord. These two small skips like that. It has a 5th and a 3rd in it. Sometimes you'll see those completely written out, but most of the time you'll see nothing. I'm calling it a 5 to distinguish it from the 6. So this is C5, this is C6, we assume the 3rd. There are other figures, there's 4-2, there's 6-5, there's 7. For now, 5 and 6 are going to serve us very, very well. Now, why do I use this form of notation instead of major and minor chords and inversions? Well, it's because this method of notation is purpose-built for improvisation. That's the way it was originally developed. If you go back to the 1500s, we're talking about harpsichordists and even more so organists who are improvising on just bass notes. The only thing they have written out their score is the bass, and they're meant to improvise harmonies on top of that to go with an ensemble or to create a prelude for a service. And you can imagine how if you were an organist, you might write in some notes, a little cheat sheet above your bass saying, well, these notes are going to sound good, so I'll write them down above. And that's what develops into the practice of figured bass. And so it really is not something that was developed top down as a theory, but it was developed bottom up as practice by people who are actually working in real musical performance situations. And so it's very, very well developed for that purpose. And one of the problems with figured bass today is that the way people usually encounter it for the first time is as part of Roman numeral analysis, which in my opinion is a very backwards way of learning it. It's used in this kind of weird algebra way of you use the figure to figure out what the bass note is. That's very, very backwards. And if no one ever used figured bass in Roman numeral analysis, again, I don't think anybody would miss it. I think people should learn figured bass the way it really works, which is an improvisational tool for developing harmonies on a bass. Anyway, that's my rant. Let's get into the actual lesson today. So quick review of last time. In a nutshell, we were doing bass lines that were ending on C. And when we ended on C, we would play a 5 chord or an 8 chord. And when we played any other bass note, we would play a 6 chord. So for example, if our bass line was G, A, B, C, we would play 6, 6, 6, 5. And if it was G, F, E, D, C, we would play 6s and end on C8. So today, we're just going to give that treatment to some different notes. So the first other note we're going to do it to is on G. So now we're going to give G the 5 and the 8 chord and give every other note a 6 chord. And that's going to give a sense that G is kind of a new place that we're going to. There's the G5, or there's the G8. So this is enough to create a good middle section in your improvisation or your piece. You start out by establishing the key of C, and then you go to G a few times, and then you come back to C. And that's kind of the story. It has a beginning and a middle and an end. Now there are two other good places to go to. There's the A chord and the D chord. Those are minor chords, so they're going to add a little emotional twist to your harmonies and your chord progression. So for example, we start on C, and let's go to A. So all right, so a little bit more dramatic there. Let's go down, C. We can also emphasize the emotional character of these different chords by adding what's called the leading tone. The leading tone to any note is the note that's a half step below it. So the leading tone to G is F sharp. The leading tone to A is G sharp. And the leading tone to D is C sharp. So where do we add those leading tones? On the chord before we get to our final destination. So if we're going to G, we've got this F, and the G is coming up next, so we're going to change the F to the F sharp. And you can hear it kind of announces that G is coming. If we're going down, it's a little bit more complicated. The F sharp ends up being on top of the chord. Because this is going to be the leading to there. Let's go to A here. So C, B with the sharp on top, and then going to D. Okay, so before you put these together in an improvisation or a piece, I practice them the same way we did going to C. So pick your chord. Let's say we're going to practice going to G, and just practice coming up from below and playing the F sharp before the G chord, and go farther and farther away. You can go up the entire octave, but going halfway down is enough, 4 or 5 steps away. So from C or B. You notice on the way up, I play the F natural first and then the F sharp. You don't have to do that. You can go straight to the F sharp if you want. And then practice going down. I'm going to go to the G8. Then when we're coming down, we can't really play the F natural first because we'll get this kind of weird spiraling melody that sounds a little bit too twisted. So we go straight to the F sharp. And then so practicing those motions to G from farther and farther away from both directions, and then you can add it in as an ingredient in the middle. Do the same thing with A and do the same thing with D. So I'll show you an example of it. I'm going to be a little bit freer. I'm going to use some arpeggios. I'm going to use some broken chords. I won't change the shapes of the chords at all, but I'm definitely going to try and be expressive with my rhythm and my arpeggiation to make it a little bit more interesting. So here we go. We'll go to C. We'll do 3 phrases going to C. Notice that I come down to C and then I do a quick approach to C from below, which is a nice effect. We can do the same thing. So I came from below and then from above. Okay, now we're going to go to G. And we could sit on G for a second. And now it feels like it's time to come back to C. But we're going to go past it to the A. Coming from below, and then coming from above. And now let's quickly go to G from below, and then above. Notice a lot of these phrases I'm not really going that far away, but let's go from far away and go to D. And now let's go to C. And now we're going to come back home for real. Let's really emphasize it come from a long distance. And that's it. That was my interpretation of it, but obviously we've got all these different ingredients, different types of arpeggios, visiting different keys. So I hope that these simple tools are inspiring and helpful to you if you're trying to improvise, and I hope that you have a lot of fun with it. I definitely do. It's hard for me to resist going on for a few minutes. For now, have fun going to G and going to A and going to D, and I'll see you in the next video.